Har has had a long-term relationship with Annonas, so I would really like him to share his knowledge about all sorts of Annonas that he has come in contact with and studied over the years. So here's Har.
This is a fully tropical tree, native to northern South America, perhaps specifically to Colombia. It has many names. In English, we call it Soursop. Sop means a tasty tidbit, and sour means that it's tart, but it's also very sweet. In Spanish-speaking countries, it's usually called guanabana, or a shorter form, guanaba. That isn't actually a Spanish word. It's from the Taíno Indian language that was spoken in Hispaniola when the Europeans arrived. In Brazil, it's called graviola. And if you buy the dried leaves for tea, usually that will be labeled with the Brazilian name, graviola. And there are many other names as well, such as queen's fruit in Portuguese, fruta da rainha. Inside these fruit, they are pure white and kind of cottony, fibrous, full of juice. The best way to eat most of them is to take the seeds out and put the pulp in a blender and make a smooth, really rich tasting nectar to drink. But you can also make ice creams and mousses and other things like that from the pulp. Some of the varieties of soursop are less sour and are appreciated as dessert fruits as is, because those varieties are sweeter and also a little less fibrous than some of the more sour varieties. The soursop has rather large flowers with 3 wide outer petals and 3 inner petals that are also wide and folded over each other. It is not possible for bees to get inside. They do not pollinate these flowers. Small ants and beetles get in there and do the pollinating. Here in Florida, soursop trees in some locations do not fruit unless you open the flower yourself and stick your finger in there with pollen on your finger from another soursop flower. And then you pat it around in there until the pollen sticks. And when you do that, you can get those really large fruits that I mentioned. One of the world's larger fruits. Can be over 1.5 feet long and over 6 inches wide. If you let the bugs do the pollinating, the soursop fruits will usually be small and twisted because the bugs don't get all the parts pollinated that need to be pollinated. Soursop flowers can have over 100 female parts, and to get the really nicely shaped large fruits, you need to get pollen on most of those 100 plus female parts, the stigmas of the flower. Soursop trees do quite well in most places in South Florida if they're not planted out where the wind gets them too badly. So on the east or south side of the house to protect the tree from the northwestern winds, soursops will do quite well. If you put it out in a windier spot, the tree will lose its leaves every time the temperature outdoors gets down to about 44 or 43 degrees with wind blowing. If there's no wind blowing, the tree can actually take temperatures 10 degrees or more below that. In other words, down around freezing. But if they're out in the wind, all the leaves will burn and drop off, and the tree will not have the sense to go dormant. It will immediately make new leaves again. And if you get another windy cold snap, all those new leaves will be killed. The tree won't have learned any lessons yet. It'll leaf out again and again and again. After 4 or 5 times, it won't have any more buds that are already made, ready to use, and it might not have much glucose left, no food reserves left. And so the tree can die of exhaustion and starvation, even though the temperature may have never gotten down into the frost range in the mid-30s. This tree has recently made 3 small fruits here. This white stuff shouldn't be here. That's mealybugs. And here's a bigger fruit down here, just barely started. The main difficulty with getting soursop to fruit in Florida, besides sometimes having a lack of insects to do the pollination, is that soursop flowering mostly occurs during cooler weather, going into winter. And so if we actually get a cold spell, then the flowers and young fruit set fall off. To fruit at their best, soursop should be in full sun, but they can tolerate some shade part of the day just fine. They need plenty of water. This tree would look better if it were getting more water here. And plenty of fertilizer. And the fertilizer for sure should have quite a bit of boron and zinc and other micronutrients, as well as the main nutrients. And your soil needs calcium. If your soil doesn't have a lot of limestone or shell rock or marl or well water that's full of calcium, then be sure to use some gypsum around your tree if it's growing in sandy soil. Besides growing these for fruit, some people grow them for the leaves to make herbal remedy teas. The tea isn't all that great tasting, so people really don't grow it just for the flavor of the leaves, but because they believe there's some medicinal benefit from it. Studies have been done that show that the leaves of some varieties of soursop have a rather high content of alkaloids that slow the growth of tumors. But other soursop trees have basically nothing of use in their leaves. People selling teas, none of them, as far as I know, have ever tested their trees to find out if they're good trees or useless trees for medicinal teas. And so the reports about benefit can be both true and false in the same breath, because only some trees have a chance of being useful. The fruits have very slight amounts of the alkaloids in there, which is a good thing for most people because we don't need to be ingesting those all the time. People who ingest too much annonaceous alkaloids can get shakes, something like Parkinson's. It isn't actually Parkinson's disease, and the shakes go away when people stop using too much of this stuff for several months. So not only soursop, but also custard apple, the leaves, are much used in the Caribbean islands and some other regions to make medicinal teas with all sorts of claims against cancer, against diabetes, helping to sleep, and so on. But people who ingest a lot of that on a regular basis can get shaky eventually. But of course, if you actually have a serious disease that someone claims that this helps, then you probably don't care about the shakes. But I just wish that someone would have their trees tested and be able to produce a semi-standardized tea that would be reliable.